Good morning. We're here for our 11th session in the consideration of Messianic Jewish, of Jewish history from a Messianic point of view. What does that mean? How might this course, why is this course different from all other courses, to borrow a line? With just 3 clicks of your handy-dandy mouse, you will be able to find endless lists of names, locations, and dates on the internet regarding Jewish history. There are excellent videos out now on Jewish history on YouTube. There are some lousy, terrible, lying through their teeth videos about Jewish history on YouTube. And so you need some discernment. And that really is the focus of this class, is to seek that discernment through a simple recognition that it is the God of history, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who has determined Jewish history. And any consideration of Jewish history, apart from an understanding of the covenants that God has given to Israel, if you attempt to do that, you're missing the point. The God of history acts in accordance with the covenant agreements that he himself has made with the people of Israel and with the nations of the world. So yes, you can certainly become proficient in understanding the movements of nations, the rise and fall of kingdoms, but you will be blindsided by the real reason for those things happening. God in Genesis 12:3 says, "I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those that curse you," because he's going to bring to mankind his plan and program through the nation of Israel. As the nations of the world have blessed and cooperated with God's plan, those nations have risen in power. And then when, for instance, there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, and he enslaved the Jewish people, the fortunes of Egypt went from here and plummeted down. And so that really has been the underlying thing we've attempted to see. So that is what would make this course unique. It's not simply a recitation, and for that it's different than it was taught 35 years ago. We're not attempting to cram as much detail into you, because you can get the detail oftentimes in a far less painful way by a simple listing on various websites that are done well. And I have some suggestions in the appendix section of your notes. That was updated, yes, for 2019. And there you will find some recent sorts of resources, internet videos, what to look at, what not to look at. And so with that little snapshot and that little pep talk, let's jump in where we find ourselves in the good old year in 1492. Not only did Columbus sail the ocean blue, but the Jewish people of Spain were kicked out. And that became a very famous year. And if you wanted to pass 5th grade history, as I did with sterling colors, you knew that. Don't ask me about my math scores. And so in 1492, it's well known to American school children, or at least it was, that that was the year that Columbus sailed. Everyone was telling him, you're going to sail off the edge of the world. He said, nothing doing. Why? Because Columbus read the Bible. And he knows that in the Bible it says the earth is saviv u'misaviv. It's round and all around. And he understood that principle, that the globe is round. No, it's not flat. All those flat earth videos that are very convincing are simply selling you, excuse the expression, a pig in a poke. Am I allowed to use that here? Well, that's what they're selling you. And so he sails, but what was the precursor of that? Isabella and Ferdinand are on the throne, and the Catholic Church is in cahoots. Cahoots is an American sort of word. They're in cooperation with the government. Here's the problem. Whenever you have government and church and they are together, bad things happen. Nothing good has ever happened in that realm in recent human history. You always have a corrupt government and a corrupt church. And so in Roman Catholic Spain, this was particularly bad for the Yidden. It was particularly bad for us Jews, because with the Roman Catholic Church imagining that it was the only representative of God on earth, they were very annoyed the Jewish people did not embrace Roman Catholicism, annoyed to the point where they were willing to torture us in order to get us to see the light. The Inquisitions, we'll consider that in just a bit. So there are periodic outbreaks of persecution. There is a up and down relationship with the Roman Catholic Church. I'm very well aware, as you need to be as well, that the situation varied from country to country. For that reason, on one of the maps I'm about to show you, when the Jewish people fled from Spain in 1492, not only did they go to North Africa, to Morocco, not only did they go to Turkey, like my wife's ancestors in the Jewish community there in Turkey, not only did they go to other places, but they also went, for instance, to Italy. That is unusual, yes. There were Jewish people fleeing Catholic Spain, where the regime there was very anti-Jewish, and they found a home in Catholic Italy, because at that time, Catholic Italy was not one unified country, but it was many different city-states. And they found the Jewish neighborhood where they were welcomed, and they set up shop there in Italy. And so there are movements. Very rarely do Jewish people stay in one place for more than 4 or 5 generations. The exception to that rule was down here in Babylon, the Mizrahi Jews, the Middle Eastern Jews, the Jews who had gone into the diaspora during the Babylonian captivity, and they never came back. They went into the diaspora in around 586 BC, and very few of them came. Now, some certainly did come back, but large numbers stayed there. Mordecai and Esther are 2 well-known names. The Mizrahi Eastern community, the community that stayed, and the area changed names. First it was Babylon, then it became known as the land of the Medes and Persians, then just Persia. All sorts of different names until finally Islam conquered that land. Jewish people remained there. They learned to get along with Muslims. They were second-class citizens. But there was a Jewish community in Babylon for 2,500 years. They wrote the Gemara section of the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud. Massive work. And so, other than for that community, oftentimes Jewish life was marked by keeping an ear to the ground, understanding who is in power, who's coming to power, and the classic question is going to be, will it be good for the Jews? Not whether we want any favors, because there were never any favors. There was just, will we have an equal playing field, or will we be persecuted? Will we be able to say we can raise our children here, or will we need to look for another place to run to in the face of persecution? So that's going to be the issue, and that's going to be the theme of the next century here. There are enactment of laws against Judaism in a very sort of patchwork sort of way. It's not uniform. Again, you don't have the rise of large countries covering entire areas until a couple hundred years later. Right now, it's a patchwork of city-states. Poland is a patchwork. Germany is a patchwork. Italy as well. Only in France did you have a country that looks reasonably like what we have today. So there are enactment of laws against Judaism. There are forced debates in Christianized Jewish converts. One of the reasons that Jewish believers particularly had a bad reputation 2 generations ago was that there were these famous individuals and I teach much more on this in our history of Messianic Judaism. But there were individuals in the Jewish community who, in an effort to ease their personal circumstances, in an effort to live comfortably in an area, accepted the offer of Roman Catholicism to convert and assimilate and do well. And for those Jewish people who did that, who also had a background in Talmud, who could debate, who could argue, who could access the Aramaic portion of Talmud, they were valued by the Roman Catholic Church because they would then be paid to enter into public debates with the rabbis, to which the entire Jewish community was forced to attend. And these happened often in medieval towns in the Middle Ages, all the way up to 14, 15, 1600 AD. Those individuals oftentimes had a very dim view of Jewishness. And just as a little bit of excursion here, that's why it's so important for many of us, particularly here in America, who are Jewish believers, to basically say this: we are Jewish. I cringe when I hear a Jewish believer say, I used to be Jewish. Oh, no. I was at a conference about 10, 12 years ago, it makes it vague enough, where a large church in a large metro city on the East Coast hosted a big conference on the issue of the connection of Judaism and the New Testament. And the doctrine of the church is sound. And one of the reasons the church hosted this was the pastor has a notably Jewish name, and he has a noticeably Jewish background, but he himself has no personal emotive connection with his Jewish family. He has abandoned it. And it's like, as we say in Yiddish, there's a word, it's a shanda. It's a shame. It's something that we find to be embarrassing because it brings up the question, did this man embrace faith in Jesus because he no longer wanted to be Jewish? That would be a horrible sort of thing. And it's all the wrong reason to embrace Jesus. The Apostle Paul didn't say, I used to be Jewish. He says, I am an Israelite. I am of the tribe of Benjamin, circumcised the 8th day, as to the law blameless. He was able to take both his Jewish identity and his born-again faith in Jesus, and they were not separable because God did not make a mistake when he made Paul Jewish. And basically, a number of us took this pastor aside after he opened the conference with a very jovial, I used to be Jewish. I'm so glad you are all here. No, it's like you could hear audible cringes from most of the Jewish believers in the audience. And by evening, he had been chastised. And he was a pastor of a very large, very influential church, coming from an influential family. I'll leave it at that. And he recognized that if you treat the thing that God gave you with such disdain, you are in essence saying that God made a mistake when he made me Jewish. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 20 says, to the Judeans, I became as a Judean. This is the Apostle Paul speaking. Paul is already Jewish, and our English translations simply say, to the Jews, I became as a Jew. But literally, the Greek says, to the Judeans, I became as a Judean. Paul was not a Judean. He was not from the center of the Jewish life. He was from the Galut. He was from the diaspora. He dressed a little less Jewish growing up. He didn't study to the extent that they might have. But he was willing to set aside his personal preferences in order to embrace fully the culture of the people he was trying to reach. Any good worker in a foreign land does the same thing. Otherwise, they write home letters saying, oh, these people are so difficult to reach. I don't know why they won't put on three-piece suits like I like here in the jungle. You're laughing. There were German missionaries who tried that in the 1890s and tried to force natives to pray in German so that God could hear their prayers. Okay? That's an extreme example. And so these Christianized Jewish converts gave us a bad name because they disliked being Jewish. They changed their name. They tried to hide their Jewish identity, and it only came out when they were contracted with the church to debate the rabbis. There were false accusations to justify persecution. So all of this is happening, and then the Jewish people are expelled. All during this time, and we had touched on this, there is going to come a geographical splitting of the Jewish people. Up until around the year 600-700, while the Jewish people had been split geographically, they were still one culture for the most part. You had Jews down there in Persia, you had Jews in Eretz Yisrael, you had Jews down in Cairo, in Alexandria, in Egypt. But they were all primarily speaking either two languages. They were speaking Aramaic, if they were, had come from Babylon, or they were speaking Greek, which was among the higher classes, or they were speaking Arabic. There have been times in Jewish history where 1/3 of all the Jewish people on earth spoke Arabic. There are incredible examples of Jewish literature, theological writings, scientific writings by Jews that are in Arabic because they were living in Arabic countries. And for those of us who grew up in Ashkenaz American homes, that was a whole history that we needed to be humbled by and learn from. And I have. And I've come to appreciate how to correctly pronounce the Tav. And it's not pronounced as I grew up in Yiddish. But that's a whole nother section of Jewish life that in many ways is much more authentic and original to the original diaspora out of Israel. So around the year 5, 6, 7, 800, with all of these movements of people being broken up, different people moving to different areas, you start to get a division in cultures. Once people have been separated long enough by geography, it's no longer easy to maintain a contiguous culture. They start to get different cultural divisions. So if you go into a Passover Seder held by Jews of Moroccan background, that's been my privilege. We had some, in our Messianic congregation, we had friends who had Moroccan background. They have very different foods for Passover. And so this is now going to become the reality within Judaism. So you start to see different sorts of Jews. And very simply, there are these different divisions. You know something, if I could do this, I need to redo this slide. I apologize. Really, Sephardic and Mizrachi are two very different groups, and I'll explain that in a bit. There are then Yemnenite Jews and Ashkanzic Jews. So let's go to that right now. Here are the ethnic divisions that came about during the years 600, 700, 800 AD. Sephardic Jews are those Jews who were, at one time, their ancestors lived in Spain. We talked about the golden age of Spanish Jewry. During that time, there were many great figures amongst the Jewish people who lived and wrote and researched in Spain. The Jewish community there was held in favor by the governing authorities. Oh, by the way, the PowerPoint can be yours. I just give this PowerPoint away. I'm tweaking a little bit, so give me a day or two to tweak, and I will happily make it available. But Sephardic Jews are those who at one time their ancestors were from Spain. Their native language is Ladino, which is basically medieval Castilian Spanish, written with Hebrew characters. Again, medieval Spanish, written with Hebrew characters. Ladino was the first and native language of my mother-in-law. My wife's mother comes from a pure line of Sephardic Jews who at one time were there in Spain and eventually were kicked out and wound up in Turkey, where they maintained a continuous Jewish community for over 400 years. Turkey, Greece, Italy, the Balkans, France, particularly are the areas where you find Sephardic Jews. Within 2 generations, you know how it goes. The kids don't want to speak the old guy's language anymore. You see that all over where there are movements of immigrants. So the kids stopped speaking Ladino and they wanted to speak wherever they were, whether it was English or Hebrew or whatever. Mizrahi Jews are often lumped in by those of us who are Ashkenaz, and wrongly so, and I repent of this, and I need to make this a separate heading. But Mizrahi Jews, sometimes when American Jews go to Israel and they see dark-skinned Jews, they say, oh, you're Sephardic. And the fruit seller says, no, I'm not Sephardic. My family was in Iraq for 2,000 years. We never went to Spain. I am Mizrachi. Mizrachi means from the east. Mizrach. If you go into an Orthodox Jewish home and you look at the eastern wall of the home, the wall that faces Jerusalem, on the wall will be a very decorative plaque called a Mizrach, decorated in all sorts of ways. It tells you which way to face, to pray, toward Jerusalem, a Mizrach. And so these are Mizrahi Jews who oftentimes will speak Arabic. They live in Israel. Many of them never left Israel. Iraq, Iran, Egypt, Syria, North Africa, Morocco, these are all the areas of the Mizrahi Jews. Now, I'm well aware that some Mizrahi Jews who identify as Mizrahi did originally come through Spain. The following map is going to illustrate that. So when you come to a place like North Africa, there are Jews who came and immigrated from Babylon. There are others who came directly from Israel, and there are some who came down from Spain. So in North Africa, depending on where you are, there's a mixed population. But oftentimes, within 2 generations, they adopt Arabic as their common language of commerce. In the synagogue and in the home, they may use other languages. There are many other minority languages in use. Yemen is a body of land at the end of the Sinai Peninsula. Yemnenite Jews are ancient Jews who were, in essence, they were left behind when the kingdom of Solomon shrunk. You know that in history, we had illustrated how the kingdom of Solomon went to a great expanse. It expanded from David to Solomon. Their influence went down into Saudi Arabia. The cities of Mecca and Medina, now 100% Muslim, at one time probably were as much as 1/3 Jewish. And so large numbers of Jews there who had gone down into Yemen, into the city of Adan, where there are trade routes. To this day, there is shipping, there is commerce there. And so Jewish people would go there, set up shops in the seaports, and lived a very prosperous life for many, many years. Ultimately, the Jewish kingdom shrank, and they found themselves left behind, as it were, as the Saudi Arabian Peninsula became almost exclusively Muslim and Arabic. These Yemenite Jews had a good relationship with the rulers at the end of the Sinai Peninsula. They were tolerated, they were allowed to live as second-class citizens and continued to have a very rich heritage until they were, and excuse this phrase, until they were discovered by Western Jews, who all of a sudden in the 1890s happened upon this group, and it's as though you turn back the Bible 2,000 years. Yemenite Jews had not changed. They had ancient Torah scrolls. They had different garb. They had long peot. They looked very different. There had been a little bit of intermarriage, but they kept a strict Torah Judaism. And so these are the Jews from Timan. Phalasha and Ethiopian Jews went down into North Africa. eventually following the Nile, again, early traders. Falasha Jews are ethnically Jewish. These are sometimes known as the Ethiopian Jews. The word Falasha is maybe not a polite title. It depends on who you ask. But these are the dark-skinned Jews. They, if you look carefully at their facial features, it's very clear that they have a different facial structure from many other native indigenous Africans. In recent years, large numbers of Ethiopian Jews have come into Israel because of increasing persecution there in northern Africa. And slowly, they are being assimilated into Israeli society. Are there problems? Yes, there were riots a few weeks ago because they are not, in some instances, they're not treated fairly. And so that's one of the challenges that Israel certainly faces. Ashkenaz, there is a debate on the origin of the name. If you go to the sources, you're going to see several different possibilities for the origin of the name. One credible source seems to say that it is a valley in central Germany, and that when Jewish people first were invited into Central Europe around the year 700, these were the factors. Islamic persecution is increasing in the land of Israel. Jewish people are being forced to leave. They receive notices from some of the German city-states, some of the German princes saying, hey, we hear you guys are really good at import and export, and that you have a system of letters of credit whereby you issue a letter in Aramaic, and that letter with a stamp, with wax, with a certain type of signature, is then as good as gold. You might as well have a bag of gold if you have one of these letters of credit. Jewish merchants were able to take these letters, and it would facilitate trade and commerce around the world. It was a very much more convenient way rather than carrying chests of gold or of silver as currency. And so they were invited into Central Europe in order to facilitate the growth of the economies of this area. And again, it was an invitation. Genealogists have made some interesting discoveries. They looked at Ashkenaz Jews today, and I am, for better or for worse, a representative, 100% Ashkenaz. All four of my grandparents were born in Orthodox Jewish villages in Eastern Europe in the 1890s. Just like the Fiddler on the Roof village, that's literally where all four of them came from. So Ashkenaz Jews were settled there in Europe. Within 2 generations, their kids, of course, picked up the German on the streets, and because they were playing with the other kids, just like kids here do today. They started to take the German language, and Yiddish today, the language of all four of my grandparents, is basically a mix of 80% medieval German, 10% Hebrew, and 10% various Slavic languages. It's written in Hebrew characters. That's what Yiddish is. To the untrained eye, a page of Yiddish and a page of Hebrew might look the same, and if you read either language, it's very clear that which is which. And so they will actually write out all the vowels in Yiddish. It tends to be a much longer language. Europe, Germany, Poland, the Ukraine, Russia, and then ultimately into Western, Central, and Eastern Europe. These are the Ashkenaz Jews. Oftentimes, the physical appearance would be very different. The photo on the lower left is very rare and very unusual. It portrays a group of Bukharan Jews, which is an area kind of in southern Russia, bordering the Middle East, and that was taken around the year 1915 with genuine color process. That's not a colored photo. That is a special plate in which everyone had to stand still. You notice their arms are on the table. Everyone's arm is on the table. And if you could stay still for about half a second, there were these special 8 by 10 plates that were very expensive but were color, and that's an actual color photo from that time period. But both Sephardic and Mizrachi Jews are coming from that area of the world all around the Mediterranean. It can rightly be argued that many of their customs and traditions are probably the more ancient and original versions of some of the customs. Again, recognizing that customs and culture change.